that she didn't know the names of. At the back of the garden, by the fence, there was a row of lime trees. Isadora was quiet. Then she said, "We could have a dog, Richard." Her husband frowned. "Just a small dog, Richard. Woof, woof, woof." They were quiet. Richard said, "Where I grew up, we had a huge garden. This is small, but it's good for London." Isadora nodded. At her parents' house, Isadora had not had this sort of garden either. Isadora chewed Richard's house words in her cheeks. Skirting board, mantelpiece, banister, hearth, trellis, chimney, coving, terracotta, wallpaper paste. When she had thought of Europe, Isadora had always imagined herself walking into an open-plan room with glass for walls. That night in the flat, while the baby was asleep, Isadora whispered, "Richard, did I ever tell you about my mother's yellow house?" "Yes." "Oh," Isadora yawned. Richard yawned. "My dad said he will put a pool there for the baby." "That is very kind of him." "We could call it Christmas." "Christmas at the beach?" "Yes." "I would certainly enjoy that." The baby made a noise. Of course, they bought it. Even in 1992, with the derelict house next door and the late-night activity on the common, it was all their savings and a mortgage it would take them 20 years to pay off. But they bought it. As Richard had said, this was a good house. Both of them had been brought up to buy a house, go to medical school, and then buy a house like we bought this house, their parents had told them. And in the months after they had moved in, when the trees were full of leaves and tiny flowers were falling like blue dust onto the floor, Isadora took a photograph of her husband standing in front of the house, holding the baby. She sent it to her parents. Both of them had been brought up to buy a house. Each of them was 2 generations away from someone who had built their own house in the earth and 3 generations away from some faceless predecessor who had never owned or built any house at all. Isadora's mother had a little yellow house by the sea. But it was the late Victorians who had built this house, although Richard sanded the floors and Isadora put up the bookshelves. And, that summer, as the baby who called to them in 2 languages learnt to walk, Richard planted a white and yellow rose bush in the garden, which was small admittedly, but big for London. And slowly, Isadora unbuilt the house. With each trip back, she brought something new, covering small pieces of kitchen wall and staircase and armchair surface with twisty red, blue, orange, blue colours. At first she brought small things, a ceramic bowl, a palm-sized wooden toucan, a little statue of a woman in a red dress dancing. And then big. Oversized checked baggage, does anyone have a spare suitcase big? Beaded yellow netting to hang from the picture rail, a huge abstract painting of a forest to go above the sofa, a green string hammock for the trees at the end of the garden. And in the kitchen, there was always orange-yellow fruit in the fruit bowl and a pressure cooker on the stove. Isadora went to the market on the high street to buy dende and shrimps and cassava, and when the season was right, ripe Kesau mangoes that tasted as wet and soft as mangoes from home. And after work, she would try to cook the dishes that she had eaten as a child. And she would underdo them or oversalt them and lose her patience, but when they sat down to eat, Richard would say, very nice indeed." This was the house that they would leave every late December, packing and locking and unzipping, rezipping. This was the house that they would quiet arrive to every January. Cold, staid, and dusty, in need of arriving, rewarming. This was the big house that her baby would grow up in, that her baby would learn to walk in all its heated sofa space and down the concrete steps into the garden. Years later, when they had the money again, Isadora insisted they got big glass doors at the back of the house. No, not like a conservatory, like a glass wall onto the garden. This was her house unbuilding, her slow house mending. Because, after all, as Richard had said, this was a good house. This was the big house that meant that Isadora would never be poor, and that her baby would never ever be poor and would always be safe. Stubborn